All right, welcome to Northwestern Michigan College International Affairs Forum. My name is Jim Bensley, and I serve as the director of IAF. We're glad to have an audience of students, IAF members, people from the community, and those of you tuning in from across the U.S., Canada, and overseas. Before we begin tonight's program, I'd like to ask our special guests, Amara Van Wagner, Jackson Price, Trey Harding, Cole Harding, and Coach John Failer from the award-winning Traverse City Central High School Academic World Quest team Quiz Pro Quo to join me on stage so we can recognize and wish them luck before they leave for next week's national competition in Washington, D.C. Thank you. This team, as you saw in the video, worked very hard to get where they are today and to win the trip to go compete at the national level. So we wish them luck. But before they go, Amara has a few words for all of you.
Hello, everyone. I'd just like to thank you all for your support of our team and for this competition. Academic World Quest has had such an amazing impact on me. As a student that will be attending Michigan State University's James Madison Public Policy College with the intended major of Political Theory and Constitutional Democracy, Academic World Quest has given me the opportunity to explore global affairs and policy on a greater scope than I've ever been able to before. Through participating in Academic World Quest, I've developed a greater knowledge and understanding of the many topics we've been provided with, and I'm just so grateful for being able to participate and for our success. It's helped confirm for myself that my intended major is definitely the right path for me to go, and thank you again for your support and everyone tuning in and everyone here in person.
Great. Thank you, Amara, and thank you, team, for doing the work that you did. Thanks to all of you who have so far donated funds to help cover the expenses of their trip. As I introduce our moderator and speaker for this evening's event, these students will pass the bucket one more time in hopes of getting to the finish line and being able to fully fund this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for future leaders. All money raised goes directly to the cost of sending the team to the nation's capital. Thank you. And now, please take a few seconds before we begin the program, and as you're maybe going through your purse or your wallet for some loose change, to silence your phones. We want to make sure everyone does that. So speaking of champions, tonight we have with us a couple of champions in the field of international diplomacy. Our moderator, Jack Siegel, a familiar face to many, is a former senior U.S. diplomat and former IAF board co-chair. In the Clinton administration, he was the National Security Council Director for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia, and served 10 years as senior political advisor to the NATO commander, where he was responsible for Afghanistan policy. He's currently an active instructor on a variety of global affairs topics at NMC's Extended Education Services. Our featured speaker, Ambassador Greta Holtz, actually has a long-time association with Traverse City, having vacationed on the old Michigan Peninsula since she was a little girl. We're very pleased that she accepted our invitation to appear in person and trust she'll be able to experience weather similar to what we enjoyed last week when she returns to Traverse City later this summer. Ambassador Holtz enjoyed 35 years as a career diplomat with extensive experience in the Middle East region. She retired in April 2021 with the personal rank of Minister Counsellor. Ambassador Holtz served as Senior United States Coordinator for Operation Allies Refuge in Qatar from August to October 2021 and as Chargé d'Affaires in Qatar from June 2020 until April 2021. She served as the Principal Duty Assistant Secretary in the State Department's Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs and was the Senior Foreign Policy Advisor to the Commanding General of U.S. Special Operations Command from 2017 to 2019. Highlighting her long career in the State Department, Greta also served as the United States Ambassador to the Sultanate of Oman from 2012 to 2015. She was also the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Public Diplomacy and Strategic Communication in the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs and ran the United States Provincial Reconstruction teams in Iraq from 2009 to 2010. Additional overseas assignments included Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Tunisia, Syria, and Turkey. And her domestic assignments included serving as the Director of the Middle East Partnership Initiative and the United States Coordinator for the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. She currently serves as Chancellor of National Defense University's College of International Security Affairs. Ambassador Holtz is also a recipient of numerous State Department Superior Honor Awards and 2 presidential rank nominations. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Vanderbilt University, an MA in International Relations from the University of Kentucky's Patterson School of Diplomacy and International Commerce, and another MA in National Security Strategy from the National War College. Oh, and by the way, she also speaks French, Arabic, and Turkish. I'd like to invite Ambassador Holtz to join me on stage.
So, Jim, I want to thank you for that introduction. It's quite an honor for me to be here tonight in Traverse City. I'm very honored to be here with you very bright, amazing high school students. I think you're further along in high school than I was in college in your level of understanding of the world, your ambitions. So congratulations to you guys. I hope you win in DC. And congratulations for how far you've come so far. So it is a great honor and pleasure for me to be here tonight. As Jim mentioned, I have strong ties to Traverse City area. Every summer, my family, my mother's family, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, Old Mission Peninsula. So I love this area. It's quite a treat for me to come during the winter or spring and to see, it's actually spring, it's very nice weather today, to see the peninsula and Traverse in this time of the year. So I hope we will make this an interactive event. My slides will not be long. I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview, a few statistics, and then we'll go into Q&A and dialogue with Jack. So. Just to situate you, I know you all know where the Gulf countries are, but part of what the Gulf countries are today, of course, is related to where they are on the globe. So most of them have, they all have sea borders. They were traders, they were sailors. As you know, Mecca is located in Saudi Arabia, so hundreds of years of people coming and staying, coming and going. So the Gulf is a very diverse and rich area. So just take a look at that. 70% of the world's commerce goes by sea. And so a lot of the commerce-bearing ships go right past this part of the world. Next slide. So just a few statistics for you to think about. You don't have to know much about this, but this shows you the literacy rates of these countries. And this has changed quite a bit. If you go from 2010 to the early years to the later years, they've really put a lot of emphasis on education. Next slide, please. And women's education. So this is quite an impressive figure because way back, even before the earlier dates, women were not as highly educated. Now they are. So there are more girls and women, young women in school and in college in these countries and in the universities than men, and they seem to do better for some reason. Maybe they're trying to catch up, but their grades are better and there are more of them that graduate. Next slide, please. So these are fairly wealthy countries, as you know. Qatar, I think, has the highest per capita income on the planet. That was my last overseas assignment. And it's a small country, small population, but high income. They have a great capacity to pursue their foreign policy and business agenda across the globe. So this just gives you an idea of Oman is the least wealthy, but still a decent per capita income. Next slide. Just a quick overview. These are not democracies. They're not elected leaders, but if you know anything about the Gulf, you will know that there is a great tradition of respecting and following in the old days, the tribal leader. There's demand and desire for more voices in governance. So a lot of them have parliaments and municipal elections, but these are not democracies. They are benevolent emirates or sultanates, and relatively benevolent, let's put it that way. Next slide, please. So this gives you a picture. Most of their income is from energy resources. Most of the countries realize that there will be an end to how much they have, to how much of their energy resources they will have. They won't go on forever. They are all very keen to transition to renewable energy and to be part of protecting the planet through climate-friendly initiatives. So next slide, please. So this is just a list of some of the top U.S. priorities in the Middle East and North Africa. These don't change, right? Stability, it's important for us, it's important for our allies and partners. Democratic principles and elections. Promoting good human rights. Key economic reforms, these are good for U.S. businesses, companies, and we believe for the countries of the region. Winding down the war in Yemen is a current top priority. Climate change, food security, water security, very important to this part of the world. They don't have a lot of water, so they're going to need to figure out a way to preserve what they have and thrive and survive as the oceans rise. Economic, political, security integration is a goal of ours for that part of the world. These countries they are neighbors, but they are not always friendly neighbors to each other. So it is in our interest to have them partner together and be better partners for each other. You can read the rest of them. Freedom of navigation, I know you know that we do not get most of our energy resources anymore from the Gulf, but our partners do, Europe does, and our peer competitors do. So their ability to provide those energy resources to other parts of the globe are important to us as well. Next slide, please. So I was asked to talk a little bit about the evolving relations between the GCC, Gulf Cooperative Council countries, and Israel. So as you may recall that 2 years ago, end of 21, UAE and Bahrain signed the Abraham Accords, which solidified diplomatic relations between those two countries and Israel. After that, Morocco and Sudan also signed. These countries were not going to go to war with Israel, but they realized that making an arrangement and having diplomatic relations was good for them, was good for their relationship with the U.S., and good for business, good for technology transfer. So this was a big push that the Trump administration made at the end of the days of the Trump administration. These are some of the factors in having those countries sign up to have good relations with Israel. You can see there were pull factors and some push factors. Then the limiting factors, some of the populations of the Gulf countries are not, they weren't ready, they aren't yet ready for having peace with Israel or public relations with Israel. Most of the countries have relations with Israel. They're quiet, they're behind the scenes. Everybody does something with Israel, they just aren't ready to take that next step and sign the accords. We can talk about that. Happy to answer questions. Next slide, please. So I'm having trouble reading these, but so another part of the evolving dynamic in the region is the relations with Iran. So as you probably know, Saudi and Iran reestablished ties, diplomatic ties. We don't yet know what this will mean in the end. It's very new. They've had diplomatic ties before. Iran is a troublesome neighbor, and it can be a dangerous neighbor for everybody in the region. So I would say that one of the goals of all the countries in the region right now, and in the Gulf region, is stability, commerce, and they want to do business. They want to have stability so that they can take care of their populations, do the kind of trade, and do their regional, pursue their regional goals, and not having any more wars. They lived through the quote-unquote Arab Spring, which were really Arab revolutions. Very unsettling for them. It caused some differences between them, and how each country reacted to, especially the revolution in Egypt, caused tensions and rivalries between some of the Gulf countries. There was, in 2017, Saudi Arabia and the UAE initiated a blockade of Qatar, partly because they felt the Qataris were working closely with and sponsoring Muslim Brotherhood activities in the rest of the region. Again, a lot of this comes out of the Arab Spring days. I mean, Muslim Brotherhood's been around a long time, but they won an election in Egypt, then they were thrown out of Egypt, or out of leadership in Egypt. So Iran has, it has proxies that it uses. You can see the hottest areas of contention: Iraq, bad for us; Yemen, Syria, Lebanon. These are areas that the Gulf countries care greatly about because they want stability at home and in their neighborhood. So next slide, please. So I was asked to talk a little bit about Gulf society. I loved my time in the Gulf. I learned quite a bit. Each country is very different. This slide is now different than this slide. But the change is quite rapid. It's quite dramatic for the people of the region. Some of the leaders I worked with, not all, but some of them talk about how they went to school on a camel, and now they're like a minister, or they're a senior leader. So for them, in their lifetimes, they've seen a lot of change. The culture is fairly traditional. The families are very central to them. And sometimes the government is more liberal than the family, or the traditional relationships they have. So there's always that dynamic. In the States, I think we have the same thing. You may be allowed to do many, many things by our government, but maybe your parents don't want you to do it. Same dynamic in the Gulf. They all have what we call youth bulge, large young populations, growing populations, shrinking family size in many of the countries, but still the youth is, the largest percentage of the population is under 30. Tribal influence: these countries came from tribal societies. They are still very tribal to this day. So everybody, the smaller countries, especially Oman, Qatar is very tribal. They identify as a family, as part of a tribe. And Qatar had parliamentary elections, and they voted tribal. So it's something we do not have here in the States, but it's quite an influence on them. Large families, but tribes. They're very diverse. So when I did a little interview with the Traverse City Record Eagle, my favorite newspaper, the other day, they asked me what I thought people wouldn't necessarily know about the Gulf. I don't know what you guys know, but to me, it was surprising when I first started working in the Gulf in the 80s, how diverse they are in religion, in culture, in background, in ethnic heritage, in language. So there are, Shia, Sunni, Ibadi. Oman is Ibadi. There are Christians. All these countries have a large foreign worker population. So they are melting pots. It comes from the trade through the sea routes. It comes from the Hajj, people coming from China, all over the spread of Islam. They left the Arabian Peninsula to spread Islam or to perform commerce, and then they came back. But they affected the people that they stayed with. They married, they had children. So it's a very diverse, very big melting pot. The large foreign worker populations make they give a tenor and a tone to the countries and the citizens of the country. So when I was in Oman, at the time there were about 4 million people in Oman. 2 million were foreign workers. So it's quite a large percentage of the population. Different dynamic, interesting effects from that. So we can go into that. So thank you. Jack and I will now do a little dialogue, and happy to take all questions.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. It's a delight to have you here, back home in a way. to where you've always enjoyed coming. And I must say, reviewing your personal history, it's quite remarkable. You have served in some very tough assignments and in a difficult part of the world. And it's, I think it says a lot about you that you would say, I want to do that. I want to go to the Gulf. Uh, you were ambassador to Oman from 2012 to 2015. Before that, what were you doing? What led to that assignment, first of all?
So right before that, I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Middle East Bureau for Public Diplomacy and Strategic Communications. So that's the cultural exchanges, the English language training, press events. So that was my job. Before that, I was in Iraq running the Provincial Reconstruction teams, which were interagency civilian and military teams across Iraq, trying to really rebuild infrastructure, intellectual capacity, and really just sort of stabilize Iraq. So
It was a valiant effort and a valiant goal, which we now look back on. Maybe it was overly ambitious. What struck you about that effort and PRTs, as we called them, in both in Afghanistan and Iraq?
So I think as we were talking earlier today, I think America always wants to fix things in general. We can't fix everything. We often want to fix things in our way. So when I was there, nobody from the military to the civilian, we had every US agency in the international affairs arena in Iraq trying to help the Iraqi people, from Department of Agriculture, Commerce, Treasury, AID, and we want to help people. This is our nature as Americans. We are not always good at listening, following the lead of the people of the country. So we would build things and they couldn't sustain them. We learned as we were winding up that effort to really make it Iraqi-led. But by then we'd already spent billions and we had made a lot of mistakes. We didn't really learn it again in Afghanistan. So these two the efforts in those two countries, most of the people who served there with US government, 1-year tours. So they try to make their impact in a year and then they're gone. Some people came back again and again, but we didn't learn how to do it the Iraqi way or the Afghan way, I would say. But we tried.
Well, these 1-year tours were a real problem because a junior leader would come along and have responsibility for an area, and they wanted a project that they could start and finish before they left. So anything that required a longer term perspective was not very interesting to them.
To me, some of the physical infrastructure that we built, the water treatment plants, the fish markets, the hospitals, the roads, didn't last. But to me, what I think did last and what I felt we should probably concentrate on was the not intellectual capacity, but the education and the infrastructure up here, so that these countries could take care of themselves better than, we would not be there forever doing this type of thing. So.
Now you were in a senior management position at the State Department, and then they said, we would like you to become an ambassador. We want to put your name forward as an ambassador. Did they say where at that time, or did they just say, are you interested in going overseas?
So they, it's a weird kind of negotiation. They asked if I would like to go to Tunisia, and I had served in Tunis and loved it. So I said, of course. And then, it's like the chessboard was rearranged and they sent somebody else to Tunis and asked me if I'd like to go to Oman. Again, I said yes. And I'm really glad I went to Oman. Tunisia at the time was going through its own revolution. The embassy was attacked. They burned down the American school. And I'm not afraid of those type of things. I served in war zones, but I was very glad that I got Oman. So it's a fascinating place. So these are kind of negotiated, and usually you take what they offer. Mm-hmm. So I was honored to be offered anything.
Well, it's a small percentage who ever get that offer, so you should be very pleased with that. That was quite early in your career. And what was your impression when had you been to Oman at all before that?
No. So I had served in Yemen and Saudi and Iraq and other Arab countries, but I had not been to Oman. So I was thrilled to get it because I knew that the US government had a good relation with the Omani government, relationship with the Omanis. I knew that it was a physically beautiful country, lots of things to do outside, beautiful nature, and a really, like I said, a good partner for us. We liked the Sultan Qaboos, who passed away a couple of years ago, but he was a good partner for the US. So it was not a super challenging country where we had to push some heavy agenda. It was a good partner and a good friend. So I don't want to say I was lucky in that.
Mhm, mhm.
It was not a troublesome country. And I think we were a good partner for the Omanis, so we didn't have a tense relationship.
Now, you landed there, really, the Arab Spring or Arab Revolution started in 2011, but it was still going on or it was fizzling out in some places. What was it like in Oman? Was there an impact there?
So definitely an impact. The Omanis were very leery of any programming that the US government did with youth, with empowering youth. They saw that as our attempts to challenge their regime. And so, because they'd seen a lot of the programs that we did in the Middle East. So the Middle East Partnership Initiative, which I ran, really was a democracy promotion initiative. We weren't trying to overthrow governments, but we believed in democracy and we were trying to give voices to youth, to people, to media, to women. And so it wasn't, it was designed to promote democracy. So they knew that, and they're not democracies. So they were when I was in Oman, they closed down the Fulbright program. They closed down Amid East, which is an NGO that does English language training and exchanges. Youth from the region go to the States. American youth go live in homes in the Middle East. They shut it all down. And so we were very upset by that. So I tried I failed at this. Every level of the Omani government kept telling me no. So I got to the Sultan himself. And I said, look, there's 3 countries on the planet that don't have Fulbright. I think I was exaggerating a little. North Korea, I think I said Somalia and one other, and then Oman. I said, do you want to be like one of the 3 countries that doesn't have Fulbright? Didn't work. It's still shut down. So they were very, very leery of anything that they thought we were using as a tool to somehow change their system of government. We were not. I mean, I would have been yanked out of Oman if I was doing anything to stabilize the Sultan, his regime. They were good partners for us, but they just didn't trust us anymore after the Arab revolutions.
This is an important point for our student audience and those studying in the future in this area, because to us, promoting democracy is a very natural goal that we want to promote and put forward. And if you take someone like Putin today, he specifically talks about our efforts to create political parties, which would be part of promoting democracy. And I can understand that the Sultan, who's an absolute monarch, would say, "Well, thank you very much. What else have you got?"
Right. No, so at that time, 2012 to 2015, my priority and our government's priority with Oman was counterterrorism. It was promoting economic ties. And Oman was the facilitator between us, the US, and Iran on the first round of the JCPOA negotiations. So on reducing Iran's ability to enrich uranium and to build a nuclear weapon. So we needed Oman to do that. We did not need Oman to be a democracy. We were not trying to promote anything that would destabilize Sultan Qaboos or his leadership.
So as ambassador, you had to communicate to Washington, and then you had to lobby Washington to get the policy to point in the right direction from there, because you were taking your instructions from Washington. And that's how it usually works.
Yeah, so a lot of people in Washington didn't understand. They thought Oman was too close to Iran, right? And so we did a lot of explaining that Oman, it's not a well-known country necessarily in all quarters of Washington. It's a very behind the scenes, friend to all, enemy to none is their stated foreign policy. and people didn't understand why they were talking to the Iranians. They were talking to them at our request. This happens quite a bit with backdoor talks in the region. So during the Dhofar rebellion in Oman, where the southern part of Oman tried to overthrow the Sultan's father, Sultan Qaboos's father, the Shah of Iran sent troops to help protect Qaboos's father, and more Iranians died in that revolution than Omanis. So the Sultan had been close to the Shah, close to King Hussein of Jordan, and so he was somewhat loyal to Iran. They're also afraid of Iran. You don't want to like poke the bear. Iran can make trouble for you if they want to. So they do a balancing act, this sort of small state hedging, which Qatar did a lot of too. Qatar talks to Iran. They don't want to get in trouble with it. You know, Iran can make trouble for you. So Oman was key to our ability to negotiate this deal. Oman had good relations with the Houthis, and we had Houthis had taken American citizens hostage while I was there. So Oman could play the quiet backdoor negotiator to help us get these hostages out. So I had to do a lot of explaining to Washington about why Oman, you know, are they under the thumb of Iran? Are they too tilting toward Iran? They hedge. They're, you know, they let Iranian ships dock at their port in the south. They let Chinese ships. They let U.S. ships. The Fifth Fleet made Oman its supply and logistics hub, but there would be an Iranian ship maybe close by. So we would, you know, raise it with them and, you know, fuss at them, but they're going to do what they need to do to maintain their ability to not be affected negatively by their neighbors.
Your agenda, it really strikes me of how broad it was. That you were talking earlier about shipping, about rights to use a base in a country, about promoting democracy. Did you find that your stint as ambassador was a bit overwhelming? That you needed a break at some time because you're never off stage. You're always visible. You got the flag on your car.
I mean, I didn't need a break, but what, you know, I did get, you know, I'm a naturally shy person. And so when you're the US ambassador in a small country, maybe anywhere, everybody knows you, you can't go to the grocery store. So I had bodyguards, I had a lot of people around me at all times. I needed a break from that. But I didn't, it wasn't like being, you know, in a bigger, more challenging country, but I did not enjoy, I like to be private. So you're never private when you're in those positions.
Anonymity is something you give up. Anonymity is something you give up. Yeah. When well, let me take it this way. If we could just kind of step back and say you've dealt with many Gulf nations, and people would ask, well, what is America's interest now, particularly that we're not getting so much oil from that region? Do we still have interests in that region? And how should that be manifested? What should we be doing?
So I think as we've seen throughout the years, problems in the Middle East can quickly escalate from something small to something big. So we have partners in the region. We have Israel as a close partner. We are partners with all the Gulf countries. So stability is usually one of our top goals. The Europeans get a lot of their energy resources, our partners in Europe, from the Gulf. So we need that oil to get out. We need to keep those sea lanes of commerce open. So stability, stability, stability. We do a lot of US business, does a lot of investment and trade in the region. So those are top goals. We are not trying to overthrow those regimes. We are not trying to foster, you know, democracy. We are trying to support them in supporting their people.
Now, in that context, though, fundamentalism amongst the Islamic populations has grown and really reached a crescendo in Iraq and Syria with ISIS. Is that something you mentioned, the large youthful population, the youthquake, I've seen it called. What are they attracted to that? Are they so frustrated with the the monarchies that they are living under, that they want to overthrow them? And do they have a chance to do that?
So I think there's a difference between fundamentalism and terrorism. So it's not the same. Terrorism is illegal. It's not necessarily, they will use religion, but it's not the same as being a fundamentalist or a deeply religious person. So during the Arab Spring, there was a lot of the frustration of the youth and non-youth was transparency, corruption. So the Omanis reacted the Sultan fired 5 ministers, brought them back in, they were still his friends, but they did a lot of things to sort of address the transparency and corruption issues. I don't sense now that the youth want to overthrow their regimes. I think they've seen that how instability is bad, that they just want to have jobs, they want to have a decent living, they want to raise their families. They do want more personal freedom. So you see in Saudi a lot of the things in Saudi now that you couldn't do before. There's concerts, there's movies, there's women can go to restaurants and not be separated. So they want that kind of lifestyle that they see in the West, or they just want. I don't sense that they want to change their rulers or their leadership. Maybe during the Arab Spring there was more of that, but they don't like the instability. They want to be, secure, have jobs, and just do business. There may be some. They understand the rules of the game. So there's not press freedom. They understand the left and rights of what they can say and not say. They don't want to be repressed. They don't want to be jailed. They don't want to be, but those countries are not, they have put down a lot of the people that would want to overthrow or change. So now they're afraid too, to a degree.
So this clashes very much with our value system, and we see Khashoggi goes into an embassy for a visa and comes out dead. And we were very upset about that until we weren't. Our policies have had to adapt to the oil crisis created by Russia. Has changed our point of view, and as ambassador and as a senior official, you have to sort of change with it and support the president. That's our job, and so that got very tricky during the previous presidency, where President Trump didn't use the system in the way that we would normally expect it to be used. You weren't getting calls overseas saying, what do you think we should do? We were getting, this is what I'm going to do, make it work or make it happen. Now, as a senior diplomat, and I know you're retired now, but you can still be one. In fact, I should mention that this morning we had a meeting where we discussed the situation with Afghan citizens who are trying to get to the United States or trying to get out of Afghanistan. And I think we had a wonderful session, and you were still very much on top of what's going on. And I think that was greatly appreciated by the audience you had this morning. But it does put a huge burden on a diplomat to have these kind of dramatic shifts in policy. Was there a channel to feed back and say, look, I know what the president had said, but does that exist in your experience in that part of the world?
So so we work for whoever's the president. We work for the president and his cabinet. We work for the American people. We are loyal to the Constitution. So we salute and do what our bosses tell us. At state, we have something called the dissent channel, where if you disagree with a policy and you want to make your case officially, you can send in writing what you think is not good, why the policy is not working, what your opinion is. So we have that channel. But in general, we do, we're a hierarchical organization. We work for the secretary who is appointed by the president. So we, may or may not like individual policies or and we can give our opinion and we can explain why we think as career people, explain why we think something may or may not work, but in the end, we do what we're told.
Is it your impression, we're going to turn to questions in an audience in just a minute, but is it your impression that now President Biden has been in office for over 2 years? Has he changed that much in the Middle East, or has he focused on other areas, naturally Ukraine and China?
So I think, yes, I think China, you got it, you nailed it. Yes, Ukraine and China are the two sort of red flashing lights. Russia, of course, Ukraine, same problem set. It doesn't mean that we are not interested in the Middle East. We need that part of the world to be stable. We don't want to get sucked in to another war. We don't want war between the countries. We don't want war between Iran and Israel. We want stability there because we are right now deeply focused on these two other areas. So, good, yeah.
You go on, Dan.
All right, thank you very much, Greta and Jack. It's been very interesting listening to you. I hope you're all taking some of this away with you. And now it's time for our audience questions. So we have a couple of microphones. So if you have a question for either Greta or Jack, please raise your hand. We'll also take questions from our virtual audience via the Q&A function. So we'll start with one right here. Anybody, right down in front here. Let's go there first, and we'll get yours next.
Thank you. Awesome. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Tendakai, and I'm a senior at Interlochen. I wanted to ask you a question on Saudi Arabia, but before then, I wanted to tell you my story. I'm a first generation Zimbabwean American, and my parents came here to the US seeking a country, which is this country, for freedom of speech and to have human rights, because they were advocating for peace and human rights and the right to vote. And unfortunately, they were abducted, harassed, and tortured by the Zimbabwean police and army. So going to Saudi Arabia with the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the reporter, how, as an ambassador, can you give some advice to maybe those in the U.S. Department of State on what they can do to ensure that countries in the Gulf area and also across the world have access to basic human rights?
Very good question. This is one of the things that we do try our best to get the other countries to have human rights, to have basic freedoms for their people, but we can't force them to do it. It's not our country. We're not in charge of it. So oftentimes we will raise those issues privately. It usually backfires, or often backfires, I would say, when we make a huge public display. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's a good tool. So we do this every year, this trafficking in persons report called the TIP report, where we rank countries and we have a lot of metrics on how to judge them and ourselves on trafficking. And that tool, because we do it for every country, they often try to get moved up in the rankings. So we have tools like that. We have a human rights report, ranks the countries. But in the end, we can't force a country to do something, especially a country where we have few carrots and few sticks, right? So Saudi Arabia doesn't need our money. They do need our security, but now we see them turning to China and other countries who don't raise human rights, who don't have a TIP report, who don't do a human rights report. They're easier, they can buy weapons from them, no questions asked. So we need to find that balance. So.
Thank you. We'll take one from a virtual audience, and it looks like, okay, Linda Ketterer says, from a broad perspective, is U.S. policy now trying to convert other countries to democracy or pragmatic, mutually beneficial relationships?
So we love our democracy. We are proud of it. We think it is a really good system of government. So we always support democratic aspirations of the people, but we don't try and force it. Like I said, in Oman, my marching orders, my priority was counterterrorism, Iran negotiations with Iran, and get the hostages out of Yemen. My marching orders were not to destabilize the Sultan of Oman in his rule. His people liked him. They were happy with him. They wanted to change things, but they didn't want to overthrow him. They wanted him to throw out some of the corrupt guys. They wanted to have more opportunities, more freedoms, but they didn't want to get rid of him. Neither did we. So it's different in every country. We have democracy promotion, human rights promotion as priorities, but it's calibrated by country.
I think would add too that you had so much experience in the region before you became an ambassador there that you had an understanding of how the society works. I know in my travels through rural Afghanistan, if you could get some male to say that he was going to support the idea of women being educated, he would go along reluctantly and then he'd say, but not my daughter. So it's so distant from the image that people get. They travel to the capital, they visit a couple tourist spots, and they report back to Congress on the situation. When in fact, most of the people live in villages and they live in a rural setting with a tribal structure. And the countries that you've served in are very much like that. Certainly Afghanistan was that way.
Down right in front here. Yes, sir.
Hi. I think this would be kind of related to what you've been talking about, but could you comment on the State Department's position toward popular, secular, democratic movements by Kurdish people in the region? I'm thinking YPG, YPK, PKK,
Good question.
and I wonder why the U.S. participated in the capture of Abdullah Öcalan in Nairobi.
So yeah, kind of off the topic of the Gulf countries, but it's okay. So the YPG, the KDP, the Kurds in Syria, good partners for the US in the counter ISIS fight. So we served with them, we worked with them, but our NATO ally, our good partner Turkey, that's their enemy. So we walk a fine line between working with the Kurds on ISIS and not. We consider the PKK a terrorist organization, as does Turkey. So we walk a fine. It's a gray area, I would say. It's hard because we need those Kurds in northeastern Syria. They are in charge of huge refugee camps, 30 to 50,000 people. Future ISIS is, a lot of people from ISIS are in there, and the Kurds are guarding it. And that's where we have a very small number of U.S. troops. We could not keep the camps contained. We're trying to get people home and out of those camps. Good partners for us. Good partners for us during the Iraq War, but they're not friends of the Turks. So we're trying to balance.
YPG, good partners, PKK, terror.
So the Turks would say that YPG, I think, are the PKK. So, yes.
Okay, we're going to go to another virtual question from Bonnie Spanner. She says, what rights do foreign workers have in each country compared to its own citizens? Is there a huge dichotomy for those?
Yes. So in most of the Gulf countries, you have to have a sponsor who's a citizen of the country or a company, and you don't have at all the same rights. You have to be sponsored in. Most of the countries you have to get permission to leave. So it's very challenging for foreign workers, including Americans. It's not just the more labor; it's white collar labor as well. Very difficult for foreign workers of all sorts. Yes, you're not really, but people keep going because the money's good. It's better than at home, and they get there. They know the conditions are not great, but the money's good. So,
Thank you. Okay, question. I think right in the middle back there, you had a question, sir.
The Abraham Accords, I think generally are viewed between Israel and the Gulf states, are generally viewed by those people who are concerned about the survival of the Palestinians as a real setback, because it seems to have diplomatically strengthened Israel and made it more comfortable in maintaining its status, its position with the Palestinians. I wonder what you think about that.
so Jack and I talked about this.
Is that a setback to the Palestinians? future or not?
I'm not sure the Abraham Accords are a setback. I think the Palestinians are already set back. I don't know how much effect those accords had. I think the Emiratis were tired of the problem. You know, they had kind of given up. So I don't know if that's really a setback. I think there are setbacks, but probably not so much related to those accords.
Yes, this is very much in limbo right now because of the change of government in Israel has caused, I think, some countries to re-examine whether they want to be an ally with Israel. On the other hand, as the ambassador mentioned, quietly behind the scenes, lots of countries have working relationships with Israel. Even Saudi Arabia, which has not said anything about it publicly, allows Israeli airliners to fly over Saudi Arabia. And they just quietly made that decision and told the Israelis now El Al can fly over Saudi Arabia and there'll be no problem with that. So it's pragmatic. Israel is a powerful, highly developed, technologically advanced country. And these countries also recognize that it has a tremendous amount of support in the US Congress. So it's rather easy to say, well, why should we fight that fight? I once had that a statement made by a member of the Congress who had virtually no Jews in his district. And somebody asked him, well, why do you support Israel 100% the way you do? And he said, why would, you know, who's going to vote against me for that? It's a powerful force in the region, but it is not, and it is our ally too. It's specifically designated as our ally. But whether there'll be true friendship with their neighbors, with their Arab neighbors, without solving the Palestinian issue, I think that's doubtful. But I think as under the new regime in Israel, I think they care less about whether they're going to be able to be friendly and have a friendly relationship with their Arab partners in that region. There's a huge increase in Israeli Jews living in the West Bank. And that number keeps rising at a rather rapid rate, and it is being promoted now by the Israeli government that they're reopening places that were forbidden for settlement by settlers are now being taken over by settlers in the West Bank. And the intent, I think, is obvious that they want to populate the West Bank. They've looked at what happened in Gaza when Hamas overthrew the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. They started getting rockets from Hamas into southern Israel. And they look at that. The pre-1967 border of Israel at one point is 13 miles from the West Bank border to the Mediterranean, 13 miles. They could look forward to being bombarded with rockets nonstop if the Palestinian Authority was overthrown by Hamas, as it has been in Gaza. So they're not going to let that happen. That's not going to happen. And that puts us, the United States, in a rather awkward position. Under the Trump administration, we did not promote, there was no peace process, quote unquote, during the Trump administration. There was the Abraham Accords, which basically was portrayed as an alternative, that we were not going to try to satisfy both sides. We were simply going to move forward, move our embassy to Jerusalem, and we said nothing about the development of settlements, particularly around Jerusalem. So it's an unsolved problem, but I think increasingly the Israelis are saying it's an insoluble problem. So we're just going to keep living here.
Interesting. Thank you. Good question. And thank you, Jack, for your response on that. We'll take another one from our in-person audience. Right down, lady right here, Alex, in the white.
I'm just curious as to you being a woman in your position, how did that help and how did that hinder you in some of these countries?
So I get this question a lot. When you're representing America and you're in a foreign country, and oftentimes the people you're dealing with need or want something from America, they treat you well, or they treat you badly, depending on, you know, whether they are against your policy or they want something from you. So I don't know if being a woman really. So I will say that as a woman, you have access in the Gulf, in the air countries, to women and to men. Because you're a diplomat, you have access to men. Male diplomats do not have access to some of the in the conservative countries, to the women. So you had more access, you had more information, and that helps you do your job better. So I think it was I would say it's an asset. I never couldn't go to meetings or go to events, and I was respectful. If I went to a lot of weddings, I would go to the women's side because they all separate. But even in the States, you'll find that, you know, you have a dinner party and somehow the women end up on one side and the men end up on the other. It's, in the Gulf, it was more formally that way, but you're treated as the flag in a way, so that I didn't find it a problem. I found it useful. Because I could get the women know what's going on, and they let you know if you're at a women's only event, you get a lot of information. You talk, you make friends with the women because you're a fellow woman. Then in your job, you're sort of, you know, you're still male or female or whatever you identify as, but you're the flag. You are America, and so having that extra ability to get insights from women. Men do it too, differently. You know, they have men things. So I didn't find it a detriment at all. I found it useful.
Let me kind of add on to that with one of our virtual questions. The Barbara Cousins asked the question, you know, how were you received as a top female diplomat in the region? And you explained that. Did you meet other diplomats doing similar jobs? And do you think it ever made a difference in the fact that you were a female as opposed to a male?
Probably. It's hard to tell. You know, are you getting results because you're a woman? Because you're a good diplomat? Because you're an American diplomat? You can't really separate, I don't think, all those things out. When I'm on my last assignment in Qatar, Chargé d'affaires, there were 4 or 5 women ambassadors. So we did a lot together with young women of the country. But I think it's hard to tell whether you're effective because of you, because you're just good at your job, because you're a woman, despite the fact that you're a woman. So I think it's hard to judge. You have to be good. You have to be able to do your job well, regardless of your gender. And if, you know, you are what you are, so you use what you've got.
Take another question from the audience right in the middle back there.
I find myself concerned by the increased presence of China in this region. And as I listen to the news, we hear stories about Russia and China and Saudi Arabia and other players, almost like there's going to be an axis formed of some kind, that there's going to be connections that form a power structure that can take away our influence in the world, and particularly in that region. Can you make a comment about that, please?
So we also talked about this at lunch. We get this question a lot. We have to compete for influence in the region like we never had to before. So for the first, 30 years of my career, so I have foreign service for 35 years, we were the only game in town. You know, there were very few Chinese diplomats. There were diplomats, but they didn't do a lot. It was America first and only. Now we have to compete. We have to work harder to be the partner of choice. What we're learning is that China's an easy partner, because, as I said before, because they don't put strings on anything. You can buy anything. They don't, that Congress doesn't affect their weapons sales. You don't have to have Leahy vetting for people who are going to participate in training or exercises. So we now we're getting a run for our money, and we have to figure out how to remain the partner of choice. We will still be the partner of choice on education, on many, many things. Weapons are better, but they're harder to get. So the US government is trying to figure out ways to, especially on arms sales, which we want for our industry, Not saying I'm pro-arms sale, but we are trying to figure out ways to compete with the Chinese and the Russians in the areas where we are losing ground. So does that answer? It's not automatic America or nothing. We now have to figure out ways to be the partner of choice.
Let me add an outlier point of view about China. If you really analyze it the way Kissinger always talked about, it's not the only thing you really should focus on in looking at your relationship with another country is interests. What are your interests? Your mutual interests and your conflicting interests. China is spreading itself around the world to collect resources for its industries, and it has been very successful at that. We buy a lot from China, and we sell a lot to China. So when you really look at our interests and China's interests, you have to ask yourself, well, who has an interest in this becoming a Cold War type relationship? And I don't see those interests coinciding. I think there is an opportunity still to work with the Chinese, just as we did when they were not even pretending to be anything but a communist dictatorship. And so it's a matter of us turning down the scare stories that are on our televisions or in on our phones about the threat from China. That's possible, yeah, and they might become more powerful where they actually are a peer competitor with us militarily. But they're not there now, and they don't need to go there. Only if we're pushing in that direction do we end up there. Now, that's an outlier position, I admit, because it's fashionable right now to say we're in a Cold War type relationship already with China. I think that would be a horrible mistake, and we can't allow it to happen.
Thank you, Jack.
I think most of the countries and people that I talk to, they don't want to have to choose between America and China. They just want to pursue their own interests. They don't want to have to choose. A lot of US companies, we do a lot of business with China. Everything, half the stuff we have here is bought from and made in China. So we don't want to have a war with China, but we are a competitor. And the more we talk, as Jack said, we don't want to accidentally slip into more from competition to war. So competition's fine. It doesn't necessarily hurt us, but I think no one knows really what in China's long-term intent is. You will have people say that their intent is to reestablish Chinese dominance in the Pacific region. Maybe, probably. We do the same thing. So I think it's a complicated question, and we don't want to push ourselves into from competition to war. Let's put it that way.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up the question. And I know we're out of time now, but I just wanted to ask Ambassador Holtz, do you have any final words you'd like to tell the audience regarding where you spent so many years of your life?
Well, I would just say, encourage you to visit the region. It's a fascinating part of the world. I know many of you have probably been to the Middle East, to the Gulf. Don't be afraid. Go visit. It's a wonderful, wonderful part of the world. I want to, encourage our young students and probably others in the region to study languages, get out there, be global. I think it is, the world is so interconnected, as we learned from COVID, very interconnected. So just keep traveling, keep studying, keep learning, and thank you for having me.
So thank you again, Greta and Jack, for providing us with a deeper insight into an area of the world that many are not as familiar with. Thank you to all the students who joined us this evening, to members and future members who we encourage to be with us next month when we host Joyce Barnathan and Gene Gibbons to discuss the ever-changing aspects and inequities of press freedom, both here and abroad. I also want to give a special thanks to Food Arabia for providing the excellent pre-event appetizers. Please visit them at the Grand Traverse Mall. To learn more about IAF, sign up for our e-news at tciaf.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TCIAF. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.